Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Morning Coffee Review. It is a beautiful, but yet very, very cold February 11th, but we're glad that you're here. Thanks for joining in. Today, we've got a special guest with us, and we're going to talk more about her in just a moment. But first, how's it going today, Michael?
It's going good. Excited for our special guest and things that we'll be talking about, especially since we're moving in to kind of like an evolution period of innovation and technology, and a lot of terms are being thrown out. So it'll be good to uncover some of these newer terms that have always kind of been there in the background, but are now more in the forefront, and discover some workflows. So excited about that. And our special guest today is, I'll let you introduce Jason.
We have the incomparable. I can't think of enough positive adjectives to think of Tasanee here. Tasanee is a member, sorry, she's a construction manager for our construction team here at ATG, recently promoted, a wonderful person from Florida. What else can you tell us about yourself, Tasanee?
Oh man, thank you for that intro. And I'm also licensed architect. I went the quote unquote dark route to construction about 3.5, 4 years ago, working as a VDC engineer, or VDC stands for virtual design and construction. So now I get the best of both worlds, where I still get to work with architects and engineers, but I'm also able to work with subcontractors and GCs and the owners. So it's been a fun ride.
So you've dealt with architects and you're dealing with everybody. So it's almost like you're a preschool teacher at some point when you've got all these different attitudes. But um, you've been with us for a little while, and I actually was part of your first job interview. And we brought you on today because our goal was to have a conversation around construction. Right? We're here at MCR. We're trying to go around our themes a little bit and talk about the different parts of our industry. And when we started talking about, like, could really use some construction stuff, and we wanted to have a special guest, and we're bringing you on to help us figure that out. We've been having different conversations, but we haven't been talking about as construction as much as we should. And how does construction, and what's going on in construction? You mentioned VDC. Like, is that still a buzzword, or is it a gotta have it type of thing?
Honestly, that's a great question. I feel like because VDC has been around for over a decade, it's definitely becoming more prominent and needed for for projects. I feel like with having the tools, utilizing technology, leveraging the technologies that are constantly advancing, it's huge for construction, the construction field today. I mean, more projects, the name of the game is we want it, of course, cheaper and faster. And so that means we need more hands on deck. We need to be more efficient. We need to be more concise. And so utilizing technology, utilizing 3D modeling, and really getting more of a hands-on approach before we actually go out in the field, really leveraging our digital tools is becoming prevalent for sure. I think now we're bringing on projects even on in our in ATG, where general contractors, superintendents, they're coming to us saying, "Hey, we need coordination." And it's kind of like a flat line baseline, like we just need coordination. And so it's definitely becoming less of a buzzword and more of a needed service. I think we're at that transition to where it's less of an add-on, service for projects, and now it's more of a base service that uh we need. We need coordination, and we need that both on and off the field.
What do you think is the biggest reason that it's becoming more of a requirement, you would say?
Ooh, I think one is that projects are becoming more complex, like with regards to the types of building materials. There's so many different, like we were talking a little bit about sustainability and earlier, and I think that ties into a piece of it. There's these different materials that we haven't used, and so now we're needing to innovate and figure out how to use these different materials on site. There's also, I think, in response to that kind of microwave culture that we're facing in both design and construction fields. Um, because of that, we're needing to refine our processes and standardize the way we coordinate through design with our drawings, through our modeling, all the way through to procurement and fab. So to answer your question, I think the complexity, just due to the nature of construction constantly evolving, I think now is like that we're entering into a new frontier where there's friction with using a lot of digital coordination tools. But we're entering into that new frontier of having to adapt and utilize the technologies that we have to build these complex, projects today.
So with complexity, that means always in my mind, right? Because what at the end of the day, we're trying to build a project. Is there a lot more design happening in these models than you've typically seen in the past?
Yes, a lot more design, and you see construction entering into design a lot sooner. Like, I've been on projects where, coming from the GC side, we were on with the design team during the programming phase. And that's something, I mean, that wasn't typical, a couple of decades ago. So now it's it has its challenges, but I feel like the pros outweigh the challenges in a way that now we are having that construction input, so that as we're designing, we're making sure that we're building constructible buildings, having, the GC and the superintendents in the same room.
And that's a very, very good point because I think, when BIM was introduced 20 some odd years ago, I think we talked about the history of that a few years ago here on MCR. When BIM was introduced, it
Some
was like,
point.
yeah, I don't need that. That's whatever. That's a European thing, or I'll deal with that later. And now we're seeing the resistance to BIM is still going on, but it seems like for VDC, it was more of like, okay, now I'm listening. And how do I get there? And I think some firms may not be in that world yet, but they are more aware of VDC than they are maybe aware of BIM and what that means. Does that sound accurate?
Yes, that's, yeah, definitely. I feel like BIM and VDC are thrown around a lot.
A lot.
And a lot, yeah. And I mean, I've had it's funny, I've had, like, in the past, the experience of, oh, can you do BIM? Can you do your BIM? And I'm just like, oh, that's not how this works. It's not like a button, you press it and everything is fine. Um,
Oh, we'll hit
but
that
yeah,
topic, David.
but yeah, to answer your question, um, yeah, there's so many differences. Like you said, we're using BIM already. VDC, I always like to say, like, BIM, building information modeling, is the tool. VDC, virtual design and construction, is more of the process. Um,
Ooh, I like that.
and I like to think of me as being that virtual superintendent for the team.
Mm.
Like, I am your virtual go to so that we can mitigate and eliminate as many possible field issues as we can before we actually go on the field. And so I think that's where that friction starts to come, where a lot of companies who have been doing this for decades, you know, the same way, or
You
they're
probably hear a
not.
lot of "we've always done it this way."
Yeah, yeah. And so it's difficult to push that needle forward to, you know, get into a more innovative and proactive state instead of a reactive state. So that's still, I feel like that's still where we're at as VDC coordinators. We're still struggling to push, that or emphasize how important it is to coordinate in that way.
And it's
Do you,
important kind of twofold, right? Because not only are you making the GC company more profitable, right? You're also hopefully coming in budget. Now, I was gonna say under budget, but I feel like that's very far and few between. But at least coming in budget on a construction project instead of having all of these unnecessary wastes. And then I think there's even a third one there, right? Which is just waste of materials in general.
Yeah.
and go into David's comment, we used to say that we build the project on paper first. Now the industry builds the project virtually first. And for years, we've just been cranking out construction documents. Here's your 2D paper, figure it out. And there's so much waste that goes on there that finally firms are starting to look at like, okay, what if? So with this sort of new trend, I know it's been around for a while now, Tasanee, but do you find that other project players, whether they be shareholders, architects, MEP, engineers, are they having pushback to VDC, or are they more of a like, okay, I get it? Or where are we at in that sort of adoption power play, I would say?
It's definitely a mixed bag. Um, I think it goes back to the experience of that stakeholder. Um, because some projects VDC have been, you know, extremely beneficial, and there have been some projects where VDC may not have hit the ball.
Mhm.
So I think it deals with experience if people have had experience with VDC on their team. Also, they're looking at a price tag on it too. And so if they haven't used VDC, you know, even if they are knowledgeable of it, they might see that price tag and be hesitant to even want to pursue it, because they don't know if it's going to be worth it. They don't know if that's
Mhm.
going to eat into the project budget. And, is that eventually going to cause even more money for something that they probably could have avoided? So I think it's definitely opportunities to show and prove and to educate, but it's also about building that trust. I mean, when I was working as a VDC coordinator for a general contractor, it was that constant having to, prove like, hey, our systems work. We've saved time and money on this project that we've done. It's very similar to the one that we're going to work with you on, and so on and so forth. So I think it's building that trust through like
Which is so
working with
foreign
these
to me
people. Yeah.
because if you look at the numbers, it's
Hmm.
there, right?
Yeah.
If that construction firm added up all of the issues that could have been solved
Hmm.
by coordination virtually that they encountered in construction phase, that would have easily, because in some cases, I just remember talking with a client that um, had to redo a lot of their prefab joists, right?
Hmm.
Because it was framed incorrectly. I forget the whole thing, but anyways, it equaled out to like 100K that they had to reinvest to get new joists manufactured, but could have been solved from coordination prior to it being shipped to the field, right? So that in and of itself is one part of the overall construction waste that could have been
Yeah.
solved by some type of coordination prior.
Yeah, absolutely. Construction waste, safety, time and labor, like all of that adds up. And I feel like that's not taken into consideration when you're looking from a bird's eye view,
Yeah,
So
they're
that's
looking at like
great
the one
points.
instance and they're not
Yeah.
adding everything up overall when it's your cost or
Hmm.
a cost to run VDC on a project is minimal majority of the times in comparison to overall waste. And that's just one factor, right? Waste or some type of coordination. Safety is another great thing that you were talking about as well, right? Looking
Hmm.
on delivery schedules, when people should be there. There's a lot that you can do from the VDC world But again, everyone's looking at those instances versus the overall when they look at a price tag. It's mind-boggling because from the GC world, you're looking at a budget overall. You should be
Yeah.
looking at every single
Mhm.
piece in that build, not piece by piece as they come along.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just budget and schedule. It's more about the whole analytics of everything. And
Yeah.
even, back when I was working in the field where we'd get called out to do construction staking, and hey, there's a concrete truck in the way. We can't get there. Well, guess what? You paid for me to come out, and I'm going to sit in the truck and I'm going to play on my phone, and you're going to end up spending $500 an hour waiting for two dudes in a truck to get out and do their staking, right? And that sort of $500 here, $500 there, $40 there, that adds up so much. And we can avoid that with proper coordination, and that doesn't even involve paper yet, right?
Right.
That's the cool part about this. Do you find more firms are taking a look at the equipment on site, like the cranes and the trucks, is part of their coordination? Or are we still just talking about, clash detection and things more inside the building?
No, definitely. Site logistics is becoming huge too. I've seen like a lot of crane structures and like looking at
Mm,
the swings and everything of that nature. It ties back to safety.
Hmm.
We're starting to see, unfortunately, there's an increase in like construction um
injury. You need to
injuries.
say
Hmm.
injury. Yeah.
And we're, a part of coordination is like, okay, how can we resolve that?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's discussions on like VDC being used or BIM being used to fabricate like jigs or like different manifolds that could help, you know, so that the people on the field, they don't have to dig in these weird areas and, hurt their hands. Something as minute as that to something large as, okay, let's look at how these two cranes on this tiny site are going to move together, and looking at it from a site logistics, something that, you know, the construction team has already been doing, but now we can introduce um, digital technology, 3D technology. We can introduce 4D scheduling. We can start introducing these technologies so that we can be more efficient uh, before we start really going out there and looking at it contextually in that way.
So if BIM is the tool, and we're saying that sort of loosely, right? Because BIM can be it's Revit is not BIM, right?
Mhm.
It's just a matter
Bim's
of
a term. Yeah.
it's a term, right? What would be the tool for VDC? Are you just living in Navisworks, or what sort of software
Mm,
stack do you need to do to be a VDC coordinator?
oof. You need, you definitely still need your Autodesk suite. So you still need Revit. Sometimes we're in CAD. Navisworks is our bread and butter. Um, Sometimes we are a part of the reality capture team. Sometimes we are using scans and working with the field team to capture real-time data.
Do you
So
see
it's
that? Okay, never mind. I'll let you continue because if I interrupt,
no,
I'll
you're
I'll
fine.
remember this thought. No, keep
Okay.
going, and I'll bring it back.
No, but to answer your question, we use a lot of different tools and technologies. ACC Insights is becoming a big, I think, tool, especially for VDC coordinators, because again, we got to provide that data so we can start building trust with our AEC folks. But no, Michael, go ahead. I definitely.
No, because I'm having all these revelations of how did this even happen? Because I'm seeing a lot of, like you're saying, people are scanning the construction part of
Mhm.
the construction phase. They're going out, construction started. Let me break this down a little bit easier. And they're going out and scanning it to see it compared it to the model. And I'm just blown away at how different these things are. I just don't understand. How are the construction models or the design models, sorry, pre-con, right? How are
Mhm.
those completely, not completely, but I would say about 65% different than what real world conditions are for a construction phase? And I think a lot of it comes from fabrication, not having an iteration of design in modeling. And I think there's a huge gap there and loss of cost, right, from these people going out and constructing it. And then you have coordination issues, a lot of coordination issues, especially from the MEP world, because the MEP and I'm thinking more in the structural veins, because everyone's probably wondering, well, what are you talking about, all these things that are happening? Well, from like structural phase, right, you're having a lot of these fabricators, especially for like tilt panel systems, right, that are having connection points that aren't truly modeled yet. And then you're having coordination issues with MEP because they didn't know that these parts were going to be in these areas when they were doing logistics coordination in the design phase.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a huge gap too, where that fabrication portion hasn't been introduced into 3D modeling yet. And that's causing these things. And that's why I was so blown away. I'm like, why are people going out and scanning like a construction part of the whole phase of a building?
Yeah.
But that's because right? They're totally different. They need to see what's actually happening in real time, and then also go through and provide a delivery to the client at the end of the day as builts, right?
Yeah.
But I was just so blown away that the difference. There's a huge difference. I'm thinking like a couple things here and there, but in some designs, there's huge differences around, I would say probably 64% was pretty high. I meant like probably 45% difference, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. I think even with VDC coordination, that's something that we're still bridging gaps with. Okay, cool. We've coordinated these areas. Okay, now we have these model-based coordination drawings that can then be translated into shop drawings. But there's still like this missing piece. And then things happen in the field where things have to change. And we have to make a quick decision, whether it's structural, whether it's design, whether it's involving gravity piping, whatever the case is, they have to make that in the field. And so then it's like, okay, well, how does that translate back to the coordination efforts? So I think there's definitely some gaps that still need to be bridged. Laser scanning, like cloud scan data, has been tremendously helpful with that, because now we have the facts right here that we can work with. But I think, to your point, yeah, it's like, how can we like mitigate that? Because I mean, I'm on 2 projects where we're facing that now.
Yeah.
And as now we're doing as-built coordination, and we've gone down such a large rabbit hole with that. So now we're trying to dig ourselves out by doing as-built coordination. But
how do you prevent that? So that's
yeah.
My thing is, how do you prevent as-built coordination on projects that reach that point? Like what would have been the solution prior to getting to that point?
Well, we were brought on so
no,
late into the
but
project.
Like, yeah.
So I think
I'm not saying those two.
is no. I like, to your point, it goes back to like understanding the value of coordination. Like if we were brought on to these projects earlier on, like months ago, a lot of this could have been we wouldn't have been in this situation. So I think it goes back to the project team understanding the value of coordination, really doing the feasibility studies, and understanding, okay, do you need a VDC coordinator? And if so, when do they need to be brought on? Do they need to be brought on during the pre-con phase? Do they need to be brought on during this phase, et cetera, et cetera?
Are you finding that more and more firms are being reactionary with VDC, or is it something they're thinking about in the design phase, like early on? Is it like, hey, we're going to do this project and we're going to have it VDC coordinated? Or are we just like, oh, by the way, we need to do VDC on this? Obviously there's a right way, but what are you seeing more of?
Oof. I'm seeing a lot of, we don't need VDC coordination until we need it, and
Mm-hmm.
then stuff hits the fan. But then when that happens in the future, future projects, they're like, okay, we're not going to run into that again. So that's that pattern that I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like kind of like, okay, now that we understand and value it, now, for future projects, we're going to start using the processes.
Yeah, I like what David put in the chat. If you start when you need it, it's too late.
Yeah.
You should have been thinking about this the whole time. And is that more of a cost consideration? Because we've looked at someone else put in the chat here, and I want to see if you could verify. Um, David said that he's heard folks say that VDC can cost 3 to 5% of a project cost. What have you seen?
Yeah, I've seen that, especially depending on the type of project. Like if it's like a lot of renovation work, depending on the size and how complex it is, it's going to be different if it's a renovation of a school nursing, a nursing school, as opposed to an actual like 6, 7 story hospital. It just really depends on the project. It depends on the type of work involved. It depends on how early we're getting involved. VDC coordination is going to be involved. Yeah, it there's so many things involved. Is it going to be a fast track project? Because now that's something totally different. Um, there's a lot of talk with third party modelers. We tend to work with a lot of third party modelers, meaning like, let's say the plumbing subcontractor has contracted out their own modeling team because they are not able to provide that scope. So now that's a whole different layer. So all that is like baked into a package. Like I could go on, but
Well, so let's talk about that though. So are you still
okay.
seeing, let's say MEP, right? So we do
Mhm.
MEP here at ATG, and that's where you live in our structure for now, right? So are you still seeing like plumbers are doing 2D CAD, and then there's just here, you put it in 3D for me. Are you seeing more of that type of thing, or are you seeing more adoption where they're doing it internally? Or where's the plumber, where are they struggling?
I'm seeing it more internally. Um, I know in the past, like we encourage, clients if they can work with subcontractors who have their own in-house modeling team. It's just it reduces a lot of potential issues in terms of like communication, etc. later down the road. Because I mean, I've heard of other VDC coordinators having nightmares with where like the third party modeler just went MIA and they were the owners of the models. So what happens? You know, now we have to work backwards from what we have if we have anything. So
Well, that's the crazy part because a lot
yeah.
of these subs don't have, again, that's coming back to like shop drawing, prefabrication, right?
Hmm.
They don't have the knowledge or
Yeah.
willingness to invest in a design team. And then they go and reach out to these third party folks, some of them
Mhm.
not even based here in the United States, and they're expecting some type of quality that you and your team really need accuracy on.
Yeah.
And then you get in this whole bubble and you're like, well, this actually isn't a full accurate model to what your design sets had. What do we do? Who do you coordinate with? Right? Because at the end of the day, to me, when I think of that, they're trying to save money
Yeah.
and make more money on the project. But really, what you're doing is creating a ripple effect out for when construction happens, which is covered. It's totally covered. You don't know it. You're like, this is great. You have a model. And then you get out there, you've coordinated against it, and then you start building the project. What happens?
Uh,
Coordination issues, right?
yep.
That's because you don't know. It's like just glazing over it, where you're just
Hmm.
having these teams designed for you, and you don't even know the validation of it because you can't
Yeah.
validate it because you've never been in it. And you're sending it to the team like, look, we're good. We met your checkbox. Let's go and coordinate against that. We do. And then you go out to the field and you start constructing and you're noticing all of these issues. But again, it's just one of those things where people are trying to save costs and not producing a quality execution of design in this 3D world. And then you're having this ripple effect where you come in those instances, like you just explained, and you're like, now I got to coordinate with that party, figure that out.
Yeah. But like the earlier we're involved and considered, like, yeah, to Doug's point, it needs to start being a part of the bid qualification process on many jobs. Because then eventually, if it's too late, the drawings and the model, I mean, they're irrelevant. And now we're doing all field coordination. It's all field coordination.
So in a perfect world, are you seeing, well, in a perfect world, every construction firm would have their own VDC department, right? Or is there value in having an external sort of referee be the VDC person? Because then there's no bias to either team.
Ooh, that's a really good question. I personally feel like in-house is the way to go. There's another route that has been pretty prevalent where there's like the mechanical subcontractor will also act as the VDC coordinator. That's like a whole different field there. A lot of people tend to practice that way. I've heard both good and bad stories about it. I think it really depends on that subcontractor's knowledge and skill set for sure. But I feel like having it in-house, it helps because now you have a team whose skill sets and knowledge can also help inform, the services and what's actually going to be needed and why. Now we can start to educate before we jump in and put the cart before the horse, because I feel like that's what happens on a lot of construction projects. We start to really get into it, we have deadlines to meet, etc. So I think in-house is the way to go.
But it also makes sense if you have a subcontractor who can do it. Obviously, they would like to capture a little bit more of that project revenue, especially if they don't have a bigger piece. Like MEP would have a smaller piece than the architect or structural, right? So if it's an opportunity for them to still be involved with the project and still capture some more of that revenue, then everybody wins. Especially when they have a smaller piece where they're not going to be, tipping things in their favor.
Yeah.
And that's what I worry about with VDC is like, no, you should move. No, I think you're going to move. Like, no, you need to move. This is why. I feel like that's part of it. Is that part of it? They're like picking who gets to.
I don't think structure ever moves, Jason.
Oh, I'm sure.
It's definitely a collaborative effort. We're constantly solving issues. So like my day-to-day, we have weekly coordination meetings where everybody's in the call. I'm navigating through the model and we're working through the bigger items where, we do definitely need to talk with our mech pipe person. Let's say we have med gas on a project and we have gravity pipe. Like I need these people on the call because they're the experts. And then we can see, okay, we have this option, this option, this option, which is going to be the one that causes the less ripple effects. And that's how we really solve our issues there. You're
essentially undoing a lot of webs. You have to look. You have to look where that web goes and see where that line.
Yeah, it's usually like a bit of a spaghetti mess when it comes to a lot of, and this is just like just keep it simple with overhead ceiling coordination, with all of the ductwork, the piping, etc. It's like a spaghetti mess, and we're trying to make sure that everything is like pieced together properly. Then if it is a renovation project, it's still being occupied, that starts to get into the nitty-gritty. I know we didn't talk too much about like FM turnover type stuff, but that's something
We,
that's
we're gonna get
becoming
there.
bigger
Yeah.
too. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Someone mentioned in here and I said, we're going to talk about digital twins. So
Nice.
Yeah, because that's another thing that we've brushed on a little bit over the past few months here in MCR, but we could probably use a lot more insight. So is digital? Let's just jump in now. Like,
Okay.
what's FM? I'll be dumb today. Well, I'm dumb every day, but like, what's FM? We'll start there.
So facilities management, that's typically the team that is going to take over the maintenance of all the equipment, etc., of a construction site. And so that is becoming, so it's like, okay, what does virtual design and construction have to do with that?
Mhm.
Well, what we're seeing is that a lot of our clients are wanting to have the full model,
Where
coordination
do you
drawings, etc., like as a package to pass on. I'm sorry, go ahead.
where do you think that when do you think that became key? Because I'm seeing it too, right? Where the stakeholders, the owner,
Yeah.
what turned that wheel? Was there some type of innovation in FM for these facilities that really gained popularity that then keyed into they want this deliverable? What do you think it was?
I think and I feel like it's pretty new, but I think like just the industry as a whole started noticing gaps between like after closeout. It was kind of like, all right, here you go. And that was it. Like, yeah, you still have stuff, warranty, etc. But like there's like knowledge behind what all is involved wasn't there. And I think a lot of older projects, especially going back to renovations, I know we're talking about a lot about renovations, but that is key to have that information. And a lot of owners and building managers, they don't have that information. And so now what is what are they going to do? And I'm pretty sure they're probably spending a lot more money when they don't have those tools to like resolve them because they just don't have the data. They don't have like, any of the manufacturing information, etc.
So you're
Hmm.
thinking that a lot of buildings, we're reaching an era of a lot of TIs, right? Some type of
Mhm.
renovation in a building,
Yeah.
and they're noticing the cost of their initial investment didn't compensate for the new cost of a TI, right? Because they would have had
Yeah.
that in some type of FM turnover. And they're looking at bids probably now and have been in the last couple of years
Mhm.
to have somebody come out, scan it, remodel it, look at the accuracy before the TI. And they're like, that I already paid that
Right.
during the construction phase. Where is that at?
Hmm.
You think that's kind of where it's coming from?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now the key stakeholders are requiring that as like, hey, when it's done, I need everything I paid for, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm.
Yes. And especially like if you think of like manufacturing facilities, that is critical.
Hmm.
And I feel like manufacturing facilities are really booming nowadays. So they need to understand, I mean, down to the part number.
Yeah.
Because if something were to happen, you know what I mean, that whole facility could shut down from one piece of equipment. So having that information, knowing what part number they need, etc., they need to have all that handy. And then having the model, the drawings, everything as one package, along with like all of the equipment information. I think it just keeps the machine nicely oiled and running.
Especially with a lot of like AI automation, right? Like the Amazon factories that have robots going around and sending you packages, like distributing the packages to different
Yeah.
areas, right? You need that data.
Hmm.
People aren't typically in those, right? Because it's all run by robotics and they need that type of information at their fingertips, like you were
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah. I think it's going back to that friction. Okay,
Mhm.
now we're understanding the value of, different technologies that are out there, different tools that are out there. Some unfortunately are getting bit in the butt from it. And because of that, they're like, okay, now we want, defined FM turnover package.
So FM determines what we now are hearing revitalized, I guess you would say, as digital twin, right? That's becoming more prevalent. So how do you define digital twins in this FM era?
Ooh, good question. I would define it as, ooh,
Because they're not the same.
they're
But they are
not.
the same, but they're not the same.
Yeah, it's like I like to think of it as like a contingency plan in
Okay.
a way when it comes to FM. I feel it's still definitely new world territory, at least for me as a VDC coordinator. But I think I definitely feel like it's a tool that needs to be leveraged more. But I see it as like a contingency for like that turnover package, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think you said it correctly in my mind to what that was, which is tool, right? So digital
Mhm.
twins are part of the process of FM and it's utilized in that manner too, right? So digital twin being an asset management solution also can be tied to some type of sensors for the building to see for optimization. So it could be one of two factors in there, but it's not a single well, it is for those types, but it's part of the FM process itself. It's another tool to deliver to a key stakeholder.
Yeah.
It's not the one-stop shop, but it is a key part, I would agree, in that process, right? Because it
Mhm.
doesn't have to have, and it wouldn't be, you wouldn't want it to be the same type of fabrication LOD of a building design because you're looking at
Mhm.
asset management and you're tying data to that. But that data is
Right.
still part of that same process where you're like saying it's a part number at a specific area on a specific machine, right?
Mhm.
That can be part of it. It doesn't need to be modeled. I don't need to see this,
Right.
bolt on this machinery, but I need to know the ID if it went missing so I can
Yeah.
order a new one, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's more of that process of how do we deliver upon these requests to these stakeholders?
Yeah.
And then I think it also is coming back where we're seeing a lot of the stakeholders in their bid packages, well, not in their bid packages, in their requirements for bids, right? That they need this as part of it.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of digital twin requirements
Mhm.
for delivery at the end. And I see a big issue with a lot of the GCs saying, "Oh, now it's time to do digital twin." And again, like VDC, not thinking about it beforehand, and they're like, "Let's just turn that model into a digital twin," right? And we're just trying to turn a bunch of data into a
Mhm.
digital twin when we don't need all of that LOD data to be driven into a digital twin. But again, I think it's just it's technology is exponentially growing at a quicker
Yeah.
rate than we've ever experienced. And it's astounding to me that we as an industry are actually finally innovating as those are happening, right?
Mhm.
Like it used to be this 10-year rule, 10
Hmm.
years. Every 10
Yep.
years we'll take on the new, but it's happening not as rapidly, I would say. I wish it would. But I think there's just an era of folks that are in that mindset of we've always done it this way, it's worked.
Yep.
But finally, we're getting a lot of evolution and
Yes.
embracement of like innovation, technology.
Yeah.
But like you were saying earlier, like in that BDC world, you save money, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And you said something about LOD, and I think that's something we could definitely dig into a bit more. Like
We have time.
standardization. Okay. I think like just looking at it from a standardization point, that's something that we're still refining too. Because like you look at other countries and their LOD standards are somewhat set, somewhat refined, and they have their standards. Our LODs might be different from one state
It's a
to another,
wild
you know what I mean?
west.
It is.
They're
It
like,
is.
I heard 500 the other day, and I'm like, that's a thing.
Yeah. So
I'm
I
like,
think
their 500's like R450
yeah.
to 400. Like, there's no bar. You're just like,
Mm-mm.
hey, you have 500, you have 1,000, and then you're looking and it's like you're saying, there's no standardization. Like, what is the standard?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's
And that,
back up.
yeah.
LOD meaning level of detail, right? Level of design, level of see. There's not even a stand. What is
Exactly.
LOD?
There's level of
Let's back up.
development.
Level of
There's level of
development. That's
design.
what I refer to it.
There's
Yeah.
LOI, that's level of information. So there's so many terms that are used. I usually use level of development. Um, but yeah, totally different. Like LOI is different than LOD, and so you can start to get into the nitty gritty of that. But that's why like standards are super important. Things called BIM execution plans, you'll hear that term a lot, or BIMX plans. That kind of lays the foundation of the standards and processes. That's, I think, would be something to use within the bidding process that needs to be a part of those contract documents, because again, it's laying the foundation, getting that roadmap prepared.
So
Yeah.
about the roadmap, like I've heard of BIM execution plans, right?
Mhm.
And is there a VDC execution plan?
So that's tied to it. So the
It's all
BIM
part of the
execution
same.
plan is a part of it. Yep.
I'm always blown away by how, because a lot of times we get involved towards the end of a design project. People reach out to us because some firm did the construction document part but didn't do the modeling. But it's part of the BIM execution plan. So I'm always just wondering, like, how did you win the project? Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's part of the BIM execution plan that
Mhm.
says 3D model required. You won it somehow. So is the BIM execution plan actually like contract driven, validated by every sub that's on this project, or is it just people are just handing these things out and okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. It should be seen as like a contract document, but I feel like it's usually something that's just handed out.
Hey, read this.
Right, and maybe some subcontractors, they're like, oh, we've worked, on previous projects with VDC and BIM, like we kind
We
of
know what
We
we're
already
got
have
doing.
the,
Yeah.
this.
yeah. So, and so that's why like VDC coordinators are so important, because that's when we have our kickoff meetings. That's when we have these separate meetings with the subcontractors, make sure they're on board, um, make sure that we have sign offs before we actually start coordinating, and you know getting all that set up is really important.
Yeah. Someone asked a question, can review open a Revit model? Yeah, Tasanee talked to me about this the other day because she's taking our Bluebeam 101 course about 3D PDFs. There's 3D PDFs, so we can still stick in the same Bluebeam review. But yeah, you can. Someone was saying, yeah, do not ever build a model, even though it is in the BIM execution plan. So it's people are saying it's not bonding, like it's not a binding document. Why is that?
What would it take to
I
get it there?
Yeah.
I Yeah, great questions. I think it's non-binding because again, it like VDC BIM coordination, it's seen as an add-on service. It's still not a core service yet, or seen as a core service yet in a lot of eyes. So I think it involves really emphasizing like, hey, this is actually a core service. It does need to be a part of, you know, it does need to become more of a contractual agreement,
Hmm.
um, and not just something that's just passed on.
What do you think it's going to take? Do you think at the end of the day, it's going to take the key stakeholder, the owner, to demand these types of excellence on projects? Or do you think it's going to be from the design team or the construction team?
I think it's going to definitely come from all uh, three stakeholders, but I think it's going to take three things, and that's education. Educating the folks on the importance and the value of VDC coordination. Whether that's through trainings, whether that's through historical data, etc. to like getting standards in place, doing some back of house work to add that validity to the value of, of VDC coordination. And three, people. I think just really gaining that trust, I feel like it's inevitable to, avoid that friction of we've done it this way, we've done it, but
Hmm.
I think it's just going to be that constant effort that we're going to have to apply to gain that trust and to show like, hey, this is why we need this.
Absolutely. And I think this is something where, as you mentioned, the rate of adoption is getting higher and higher, and firms
Mhm.
cannot afford to
I'm
turn a
so
blind eye to
happy.
it. They absolutely cannot afford to be like, well, this is the same way I'm going to do it. I'm not, if that's a VDC project, I'm not going to do it. You're not going to be around if you're not paying
Mhm.
Yeah.
attention to it. You don't have to be doing it today, but you should be keeping an eye on it. This is the stuff that you should be reading when you get home from work, is like, how do I make sure that we're not missing this huge gap? Because as we've seen before, and
Yeah.
heck, here at ATG, we're always having these conversations of like, okay, so you've ignored technology for 20 years. So when you came out of your coma, or came out from behind a rock, like, this is what it's going to take to get you caught up. And that jump is
Mhm.
really, really high. But
It
if you start
is.
making these little steps, little
Yep.
improvements, it's going to make this adoption even easier, because I see that once firms start to see the value, cost savings, the safety, all the things that go on with this, that like you can't afford not to do it.
Yeah.
So if you start taking steps today, it's just going to make life so much easier. Um, and it's, you mentioned the technology stack, and I'm surprised we made it this far without even talking about Bluebeam yet. But like, most of the tools that you talked about, everybody already has.
Yeah.
Most people have Revit. They've got AutoCAD. They've got Navisworks. They've got Bluebeam.
Hmm.
Build and ACC are still being adopted, but you should probably be looking at that too, because it's pretty great. But most people have this stuff. It's just a matter of
Yeah.
fixing the mindset,
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
Definitely.
that's the hardest part.
I feel like it's training, but I'm just excited at innovation happening at more of a rapid pace. Um, I know some people aren't, they're scared of it, but I think it's just the adoption because, to be honest, we're on an AI cusp here,
Hmm.
right? So if you're not up to speed, you're going to be so far behind the eight ball when AI comes out, and it's around the corner
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
for what we're going to be able to automate for streamlining processes, right? And if you're not
Yeah.
even at the start of technology to get into the AI world, you're going to be so far behind that it's just you're going to be drowning. There's no
Yeah.
I'm not going to say there's no way to get out because there always is, right? You always find a way. But if you want to be winning projects, right, or executing projects and building and constructing projects, and you're not part of the innovation period, we're finally at that turning point. I was talking to Matt about this the other day, where I was like, it's like the internet when the internet came out,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
It truly is. This is a new innovation, which is AI
Yeah.
technology for what we do. Um, and if you're not embracing that part of starting to get in, you don't even have to embrace AI. You should. But if you're not part of the innovation that is the leading point into AI,
Hmm.
that's going to be a struggle.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And that, that goes back to the whole digital twin and FM thing. And, you know, soon, and thinking about this, me being a car guy, there's always car recalls, right? Truck got recalled. There's a faulty float in the fuel pump or whatever else, and that has to get recalled. Imagine when we've got a whole building or a manufacturing facility, and a maker will say, hey, part number 59302 is default, take it out immediately. If you've got
Hmm.
AI and you've got a digital twin, it can tell you, hey, we got a problem, we got to swap out this valve. And then you can start looking at, well, what does that mean for downtime? What does that mean for safety? Who is
Hmm.
qualified to remove that part? Having all that stuff instead of having a failure, which could be detrimental or devastating.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
wild.
Or the pointing finger game, all of that, just you just eliminate it.
Hmm. So how did you, well, we got a few minutes left here. So how did you turn that corner to go to the dark side? So you as an artist and architect, how do you end up being a VDC coordinator? Was there a particular project that said, okay, I want to do that? Or was it more of a, hey, you do this now?
Well, when I was an architectural designer, I I worked with a design build and manufacturing company. And so it was really unique because we designed and then we were a design build firm, but we also had an actual manufacturing facility outside of our backyard. So we were actually pouring the structure, like we were pouring floor slabs, we were pouring columns, etc. And so with that, we had to do a lot of BIM. VDC wasn't, we didn't have that, we didn't do VDC coordination, but we had a lot of BIM in terms of like making sure that the blockouts and everything were there, looking at the rebar configuration, etc. We were doing that, 3D and 3D. And so I had such a fascination with that because to me it just made sense. I was just like, I understand the design side, but it was like that bridge between procurement and like design. And so I was just really fascinated on understanding like what the impacts of 3D modeling beyond the design. So that was kind of like that gateway drug that got me into that. Um, it wasn't until I became like project manager in the architecture field where I was like, okay, I like solving problems, but not in this way. So
Mm-hmm.
it took me, I had a friend who was a VDC engineer for a GC firm. And I would ask him, I'm like, what do you do? I was like, what do you do on a day to day? And it was so hard for him to answer because it was like a different challenge every day.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, sometimes I'm in the field and I do this. And then sometimes, we have to huddle up and we have to, we're looking on the iPad and we're looking at the 3D model. I'm just like, what are you talking about? And so he introduced it as much as he could. And then that's when I found out about an opportunity to be a VDC coordinator. And that's where I really started to click when I did my interview. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, this is what I've been like really wanting to do. And so that's how I was able to get the opportunity. And really just that's really where it started from there.
That's awesome. I love, and I know I've got plenty of characters in my past work history that have sparked a little interest or curiosity
Yeah,
or made a lit a flame to drive me to something. And it's always cool when we can have those relationships and even in passing that change where you are today. You might
yeah,
not be where you are today if you hadn't had those conversations or asked those questions however many years ago.
absolutely.
Um, and that goes to the whole thing of hiding underneath a rock. If you're aware of trends and you're asking questions and you're taking stock in what you do all day, it's going to lead you places that you wouldn't be left to if you just hunkered
Yeah,
down and did the same thing all day long. So,
exactly.
um, really, really cool
Embrace your
stuff.
passion,
Embrace
is
the
what I
Yeah,
say.
passion.
Yeah.
We go down rabbit holes all the time here on MCR, and sometimes those rabbit holes are going to lead you to new heights and to new things that are well worth discovering. So ask the
yeah,
Hmm.
question, um, be curious, Google it if you have to. Ask somebody is even better. But I certainly want to thank you for joining your time or spending time with us this morning, Tasani. We're gonna bring you back on eventually,
Yes.
Yay.
maybe
Thank
all
you
the
for
time,
having
because
me.
this was a great conversation. I really appreciate how fast the time went, and I learned new stuff, and I hope you all tuning in did too. So, that said, I don't have a whole lot of announcements, but I will say that Bluebeam Unbound registration is open, but just wait a couple of weeks, maybe. I'm just saying. And then we'll go from there. Michael,
Okay.
we're
Yeah.
gonna
No.
you're
Yeah.
watching. You were gonna say like,
I thought
don't
we were
do
gonna
it.
say it, but okay. Yeah, you're good.
Nope, nope. I'm not getting in
I
trouble
was
today.
making sure you all know Jason, so I was putting up some guardrails. I was ready to jump in, but again, thank you, Tasani. Thanks for jumping on again, and Unbound is out. So appreciate everyone joining. And in the future, we'll have you back on to talk more about this world and maybe loop in some solutions and talk through some workflows. But again, appreciate you for jumping on and appreciate everyone for listening in. And we'll see you all when, Jason? Because you say the exit way better than me.
We'll see you next Tuesday, 8:30 Central, or anytime you want on YouTube. So thanks again for Tasanee. Thanks again for everybody for asking questions. Really fun episode today, and we will see you next week. Take care, everybody.
Hey there, thanks for tuning in. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe and check out some of the other content on our channel.